Today we are talking about the higher self and the ego and unlocking the God within. And I'm talking about this today because I've done some videos on the higher self and I've done some videos on the ego, but specifically I want to talk about the higher self and the ego together and how they relate. Because there are some New Age thought systems, some Eastern religions that almost describe the higher self and the ego as enemies. Or at least that the higher self is some sort of perfect being that's guiding you and looking out for you, and that the ego is almost something that needs to be destroyed or eliminated. And as we're going to see, this is far from the truth as you can get. This is not how it is. So we're going to see in actuality what the higher self is, what it has to do with the ego, and see that they're not enemies, and the higher self is not some sort of inerrant perfect being, and the ego is not something to be destroyed, but rather we need to use them as in a symbiotic relationship. And this is going to be key to understanding how to unlock your divine potential. So we're going to be taking a look at this in relation to Hyperianism and the avatar and monadic perspectives, as well as how it relates to Carl Jung's work in understanding his model of the psyche as well, in which there is some overlap into Hyperianism. Not exactly, but there is some overlap. So we're going to be taking a look at that right now. Also, keep in mind, if you are a supporter on Patreon, you'll be able to get access to my lecture notes for this stream and many others. And we're also having a secret live stream after this that you'll be able to be a part of as well. So let's get started. So as I said, today we are really diving into the ego and the higher self and their relationship to each other. So that's what this is going to be about. Let me give you a very quick overview on the ego and the higher self, and then we're going to dive into a more detailed explanation. So as I said, in many New Age and sometimes even Eastern religions, they depict your higher self as almost this perfect being that's watching out for you and that, you know, even pray to and ask for guidance, and the ego is sort of this thing that needs to be destroyed and eliminated. Now, here's the thing. Nothing could be further from the truth. The higher self and the ego must exist in a symbiotic relationship if you want to achieve your godhood, if you want to achieve your divinity, if you want to actualize. So what the higher self is it's you in your totality, your eternal self. In Hyperianism, this is the monadic perspective. Your ego is part of the avatar perspective, as is your body. It is just the component of your psyche that is related to the avatar perspective. So what the ego is a selector function. It's the center of your field of consciousness. It is necessary for self-awareness. It is necessary for you to have an I, a knowledge of you as an independent being. Now, the purpose of the ego is a tool that the higher self has developed in order to act as a bit of a mirror. The ego is almost a mirror for the higher self to become aware of itself, and through which it actualizes. The avatar, the ego, the I, is a gateway or a door for you as a higher self to step through and actualize. It's been said that the ego is the servant of the higher self. And what we need to realize is that the ego is a powerful tool for our actuality and development that allows the higher self to actualize and develop. Because the higher self does not exist as a perfect entity right now. The higher self is evolving itself, and it uses the ego as a tool through which it evolves. That's very important to understand. The ego is not something that we want to destroy or eliminate. If you were to destroy your ego, you would not evolve, you would devolve. We talked about this in our streams on consciousness. The ego is necessary for a sense of I and self-awareness. If you were to permanently destroy your ego, you would no longer be a self-conscious entity, you would merely be sentient, placing you at the level of animals. You would have an animalistic sense of awareness, pure sentience, rather than self-awareness. Ego is what allows us to have self-awareness. It is our center of the field of consciousness. And the development of the ego is the tool of the higher self that allows it to actualize. We do not want to destroy the ego. The ego is a tool. However, it's also very important that we do not identify with the ego, because the ego is not who we truly are. The higher self is what we truly are. The ego is merely an extension of, or a tool of, the higher self, or the higher self in miniature, if you will. Here's a great way to understand it. Let's say that you are playing a video game. To express yourself in this video game, you create an avatar for yourself to explore that game world. Now you, outside of the game world, that's like you as the higher self. And the avatar that you create to enter that game world, that's a bit like your ego. That's a tool. Now, you don't want to identify with that game character. That's not who you are. But it is a tool to allow yourself to interact in the game world. Now, this analogy is not perfect. The ego is a lot more than that, in that it is what allows the higher self to actualize. It is a tool, but we don't want to identify with it. We want to identify with our higher selves. And we as Hyperians have gained the ability to become aware of our higher selves. That is the monadic perspective. Most human beings, their ego selects only for, well, their own ego, their own I, which means they only are at the avatar stage of awareness. The ego is a selector function that has gained the ability to select for itself, and most humans identify with their ego or the persona, but we're not getting into the persona today. We'll talk about the persona a few weeks from now, most likely. But a lot of humans identify with their I, their self-awareness, their ego. We don't want to identify with the ego. We want to identify with our higher selves. But that does not mean we want to destroy or eliminate the ego. The ego is a very powerful tool. And once you are able to not identify with the ego, that means you can alter your ego. You can change it. You can transform it and allow your higher self to actualize through it. And we want to do this. And it's very important. This is not an elimination of the ego, but it's actually an expansion of the ego. The ego, I want to emphasize, there is all this negative stigma placed on ego. Placing a negative stigma on ego, this will block you from your divinity. The ego is not a bad thing. We just don't want to identify with it, but we want to strengthen it by allowing it to evolve its capacity and function in a more optimal way, so that it is allowing your true self, your higher self, to evolve. And again, if you think that sounds weird or contradictory, just think about a tool that you have. If you have a tool helps you accomplish your goal. You don't want to destroy your tool because you won't accomplish your goal. But do you want to identify with your tool? Do you want to think that the tool is you? No, of course not. And guess what will help you achieve your goal even better? If you make your tool better, if you improve your tool. So now compare that to the ego. The ego is the tool of the higher self for its actualization. You don't want to destroy your ego, but you also don't want to identify with your ego. You want to make your ego function better, to strengthen it, to improve its functional capacity. Always go back to that tool analogy if that starts to sound fuzzy. But that's it in an essence. Now, I'm going to have to move on here. There's so much more I want to talk about, but I want to now talk a little bit about the ego in terms of Jungian psychology. So we're talking now about the ego in terms of Jungian psychology. Jung saw the ego as the center of the field of consciousness, which contains our conscious awareness of existing and a continuing sense of personal identity. The ego is responsible for your sense of personal identity. It is an organizer of our thoughts and intuitions, feelings and sensations, and has access to memories which are not repressed. The ego is the bearer of personality and stands at the junction between inner and outer worlds. So what your ego is doing is what allows you to consciously organize your thoughts, experiences, etc. It is a tool for organization within the realm of your consciousness, and it is also the ability which allows you for self-reflection. Here's an extremely important part. The ego arises out of the self. So in Jungian we call it the higher self. In Jungian psychology, it's simply called the self. So I'm just going to insert higher self every time they say self. The ego arises out of the self, or higher self, during the course of early development. It has an executive function. It makes decisions. It perceives meaning and assesses values, so that it not only promotes survival, but makes life worth living. It is an expression of the higher self, though no means identical with it. The higher self is much greater than it. Really important, okay? The ego is not a bad thing. It's incredibly important. So stay away from these dangerous new age ideologies that tell you you need to destroy the self, or even a lot of Buddhist thinking that says that you need to eliminate the ego, dissolve the ego. No, that is a de-evolution. That is evolution inverted. That's going back to an animalistic state of mind. We want to reach a divine state of mind, and the development of an ego is a stage in the development of divinity. When your higher self becomes fully actualized, that's you as a fully actualized God. And when your ego develops, imagine a flower, or not a flower, but like a tree or a plant. Imagine a plant that's growing and it starts to bloom. A flower blooms. Eventually that's going to become fruit, and it's going to end up in the actualization of the plant. But that flower just blooming, it's like an ego beginning to develop. You don't want to chop that off. Like a lot of New Age and Eastern religions teach. You don't want to destroy that piece, because that's an expression of the plant beginning to evolve. And so the ego arises out of the higher self. It is an expression of the higher self, but it is not identical to the higher self. The higher self is much greater than it. Carl Jung compared the nature of consciousness to the eye. Only a limited number of things can be held in vision at any one time, and in the same way, the activity of consciousness is selective. Selection, he say, demands direction, and other things are excluded as irrelevant. This is bound to make conscious orientation one-sided. The contents which are excluded sink into the unconscious, where they form a counterweight to the conscious orientation. Thus, an increasing tension is created, and eventually the unconscious will break through in the form of dreams or images. So the unconscious complex is a balancing or supplementing of the conscious orientation. So here's the idea. Your consciousness and dealing with ego consciousness is a limited viewpoint. Just like your eyes only capture a limited view of what's going on. The reason why in Hyperianism we want to expand and develop the ego, it's because that's like expanding your field of vision, allowing you to see more things. And one thing that I want to say real quick is that in modern day language, in colloquial language, having a big ego is conflated with, oh, you're very full of yourself. You're very narcissistic. That's not what we mean by ego, okay? That's just using the word in a different way. Ego has nothing to do with an inflated sense of self-importance. What we mean by ego is the center of your field of consciousness, the selector function that has gained the ability to select for itself. It's your sense of I, your sense of self, the selector function. Again, I explained it. It has nothing to do with an inflated sense of self-importance. That can occur if you identify with your ego and you become possessed by a certain archetypal possession. That has nothing to do with demonic possession or anything like that. All right, I'm going to continue or else I'm going to go way off track, but I just wanted to put that out there. Anyway, the reason why in Hyperianism we want to expand and develop our egos is because it is an expression and a function of the self, and it is akin to expanding your field of vision. So what do we want to do? Your higher self is the totality of you, which includes the ego. So if you imagine a circle containing everything that is you, that's your higher self. Within that circle, you're going to have the unconscious, the shadow self, the mirror self, the power self. Then you're going to have consciousness, which contains the ego and the persona. Those are all elements of you. So your true self is the higher self. It's the totality. Within the higher self are many structures like the shadow self, the mirror self, the unconscious, your power self, your ego, your persona. So you see, your ego is simply one part of you as the higher self. So in Hyperianism, your higher self is what you are. That is you as an eternal mind, a monad, an eternal soul. The avatar perspective in Hyperianism is your actual physical body and the ego and what's associated with ego consciousness. So what do we want to do in Hyperianism? We want to actualize our higher self. We want to actualize our divinity. Well, what does that entail doing? Making the unconscious conscious. We want to expand our field of vision so that the entirety of our being is brought into consciousness. Then, when the entirety of our being is brought into consciousness, we can organize it so that it is all operating optimally and symmetrically, and we will achieve full power. Right now, the vast majority of what we are unaware of and resides in the unconscious. And it's very chaotic. The shadow self, the mirror self, the power self, they're all fighting, they're all conflicting. The shadow projection and power self projection, mirror self projection, all of this chaotic asymmetrical occurrences are happening because they reside in humanity's unconscious. The goal, entailed in the goal of Hyperianism in the path to divinity is bringing unconscious content into consciousness. Thereby, we can now organize it so that everything is working together in harmony. This is how the higher self actualizes. The higher self is a totality, but it is a bit of a chaotic mess right now. Through the tool of the ego, we can begin to actualize our higher self, and we want to make that unconscious content conscious and begin to organize it. That is what in Hyperianism inner star actualization is all about. And we talk about the ego, we talk about the mirror self, we talk about the power self, we talk about becoming aware of these structures, bringing these structures into consciousness, and then organizing these structures so that they are working together coherently. So remember, I want to make it clear also that right now, remember, in Hyperianism, we have the avatar perspective, the monadic perspective, and the absolute perspective. In today's talk, we're simply talking about the avatar perspective and the monadic perspective. The avatar perspective is you as a body and the ego. The monadic perspective, that's understanding yourself as the higher self. We as Hyperians, those who have developed to a sufficient degree, are aware of our higher selves, are aware of our monadic selves. Most of humanity is not. They are only aware of their avatar selves and are stuck only in their very limited ego consciousness. But we have expanded our abilities to select for our monadic selves, our true selves. Now, keep in mind that we aren't even talking about the absolute self, which deals with the collective. We'll talk about that in another video. But let's continue and talk about the self, or as we call it, the higher self in Jungian psychology. The self, or higher self for Jung, comprises the whole of the psyche, including all its potential. So in Hyperianism, the higher self is the whole, as in the entirety of you as a soul, as a monad, as an eternal mind, and all of its potential that is unconscious, but the ego develops as a center of your field of consciousness. So you see how the ego is a bit like your higher self in miniature. It's the part of your higher self that's becoming aware, but you don't want to identify with it. You want to realize that you can change it and alter it and expand it and grow it like a plant, like a seed. That's what it is. It's beginning to bloom. The ego is very important. It's the development of the self. The self generates it to help itself evolve and become aware. So the higher self represents the whole of the psyche, including all its potential. It is the organizing genius behind the personality and is responsible for bringing about the best adjustment in each stage of life that circumstances can allow. Crucially, it has a teleological function. It is forward-looking, seeking fulfillment. The goal of the higher self is wholeness, right? And Jung called this search for wholeness the process of individuation, the purpose being to develop the organism's fullest potential. Now, in Hyperianism, your higher self is the monad in general, and the highest potential for the monad is divinity, godhood. So you can see how we understand Jung's philosophy, but expand it tremendously to apply to you as an eternal mind and the teleological evolution to divinity. And the higher self, you as a monad, is ultimately unconsciously seeking fulfillment, development, and actualization. And it develops the ego as a powerful tool to do this. I'm emphasizing this so strongly because you're going to hear so much in New Age and Eastern religion to destroy the ego. No, 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 no. Don't destroy it. The higher self finally developed it. It's a good thing. You don't want to identify with it, as so many humans do, but you don't want to destroy it. Now, there's nothing wrong with temporarily bypassing the ego as well. During void states and some psychedelic states, there is this, what you might call the bypassing of the ego. There's nothing wrong with a temporary bypass. That's not destruction. That's not the goal, as is in many New Age and Buddhists or Eastern religion teaching with a dissolving of the ego. No. That is the opposite of evolution. Your higher self just developed this. Don't smash the flower that's barely beginning to bloom. So the higher self has a teleological function. It is forward-looking, seeking fulfillment. The goal of the higher self is wholeness. And we are always whole, but it is a chaotic mess. Imagine it being like a Rubik's Cube that is scrambled. The Rubik's Cube is always whole. It's always one Rubik's Cube, but it's not in the best. It's a chaotic mess. It wants to solve itself. The goal of the higher self is wholeness, the purpose being to develop the organism's fullest potential. It is a distinguishing feature of Jungian psychology that the theory is organized from the point of view of the higher self, not from that of the ego, as early Freudian theory was. The ego, along with other structures, develops out of the self, the higher self, which exists at the beginning of life. So, and also it is therefore capable of being projected onto figures or institutions which carry power, such as God, the sun, kings and queens, and so on. So what this means is that humanity, and this has to do with what we call the power self in Hyperianism, will often give away their power. Instead of actualizing their selves, they'll power self project. The power self is the core of the higher self. I don't want to get too much into that today because it's a bit off topic, but in essence, instead of humanity developing its own potential, they will project and worship that in others, such as the creator God of the Bible, a powerful politician, a celebrity, the sun, gods. This is why projection is very dangerous. When we project what is in us onto something external, in this case, our own divinity. We don't want to project our divinity onto something external. Case in point, mainstream Christianity. Oh, I worship Jesus. Jesus will save me. No, you have given away your divinity and projected your own divinity onto an external concept. Take your divinity, it's in you, develop it within yourself. So you are a monadic mind, an eternal being. This is you as your higher self. The goal of it is to achieve its full and total actualization, which is divinity. How it does this, one aspect, is through development of the ego, which is a powerful tool, which is not you. You should not identify with it. You are a monadic mind, but you should take full advantage of it and expand its capacities so that you can make your unconscious conscious and organize that jumbled puzzle, that jumbled pattern, that scattered, chaotic content into something cohesive, whole, unified, operating together to fully express who you are and what you are and your divine power. So your higher self is not some kind of, like is depicted often in New Ageism, this higher being that's already perfect, that's guiding your life, that you can no, the higher self is in development. It's you. The higher self is you. So you're evolving. And the ego is a tool through which it does. And you should utilize that tool to express your divinity. Not give your divinity away, not try and destroy your ego. Do you see how all these systems are trying to block you? Like mainstream Christianity, it wants you to give your divinity away. Or Eastern religions and New Ageism, some of them want you to destroy your ego, which is the tool of the higher self for actualization. Everything at every turn is trying to block your divinity, steal it from you. But in Hyperianism, it's about stepping into your divinity, looking where every other system and human in the mainstream world doesn't look, which is inside yourself, in us. That's where it is. And ultimately, the goal of a new world that we want to create, New Terra, is giving humanity the tools to actualize their divinity. You see how it all connects, how it all comes together? So this is the relationship between the ego and the higher self. It's not something to identify with, but it's a powerful tool. Expand its capabilities. Use it to make the unconscious conscious, to organize that information and allow your true self, your monadic self, your higher self to reach divinity. We're going to be taking a look at more structures of the unconscious and how they all relate to each other and how to organize them in future videos. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to everyone who supports on Patreon, especially our top supporters, Kurikumo, Timothy, Rex, Naruda, Rupfu, Renaissance Fairy, all our awesome top supporters. Thank you for supporting on Patreon. I will be making my lecture notes for this live stream and many of my other streams available on Patreon for you to have. And you'll also get access to our weekly secret live streams. We have them every single week. We're having one right after this. So consider supporting on Patreon. It's the best way to support my work with all the censorship and deplatforming that goes on YouTube and Facebook, etc.